All right, we'll get started any minute now with this training webinar on the Smart Readiness Indicator, or in short, the SRI. I want to start before doing the actual presentation to remind you of some practicalities. We'll first do this introductory explanation on what the SRI is and giving you some background information. In the second part of this webinar, we'll have a Q&A session. We invite you to write down your answers in the chat box. Also during the meeting, that makes it easier for us to select and group them together, and so we can cover that at the end of the meeting. Second element of the practicalities is that I want you to remind you of the fact that this meeting is being recorded. So with that, let's get started. Can you go back to the previous slide, please, Sophie? So now an official welcome to all of you on this SRI training webinar. The SRI, or the Smart Readiness Indicator, is an instrument being developed by the European Commission to allow to assessing smartness of buildings, and thus also increasing capacity of the market to understand what the values are of smartness, and increasing the smartness of the existing building stock. It's all related impacts that brings along. We'll come back to that later. The Commission has set up a technical support team, which is a 2-year service contract that assists the European Commission in helping member states working on the first phases of the testing and the implementation of this voluntary instrument across Europe. The technical support team consists of a consortium led by VITO. We also have Wage Strategic Efficiency Europe. We have Paul Wheat represented here in this webinar today. We have Research to Market, R2M Solution, as a partner, and Sophie Durlans Caranta and Regis Decorme will be presenting today, and we have LIST, Luxembourg Institute of Science and Technology, also as one of the partners. The project, or the support contract, runs from May 2021 to the end of April of 2023. We have a lot of activities, including, for example, and we'll come back to that later, the kickoff meeting of the SRI platform, 16th of December. But in preparation to this kickoff, we acknowledge that there is a different level of understanding of what the SRI is all about, and we therefore set up this additional webinar to get everybody up to speed. Today we'll be thus presenting the following elements in this webinar. We start with an introduction to the SRI framework. Next, we'll be discussing the building blocks of the SRI calculation methodology. We'll be looking into the practicalities of assessing the SRI in practice. We'll guide you through the public resources which are available, inform you on the next steps, and finally conclude with the Q&A. And so I want to recall, for those of you who joined later, please fill out the questions you might have here in the chat. That makes it easier to cover them in the end. So with that being said, we can get started with introducing the framework of the SRI. Smart technologies have been acknowledged as an enabler to decarbonize the building stock. So they will be essential to allow buildings to perform optimally in a low carbon energy grid of the future, for example, by offering flexibility. At the same time, smart technologies can provide healthier living environments. They can make your building behave more efficient. For example, controlling ventilation rates, adjusting lighting, can make your building more comfortable. So there are a lot of benefits, but in the building sector, which is more of a traditional setup, some of these benefits are not well known for this moment. And that's why the Commission, European Commission, took the initiative to set up the SRI. It originated from the European Green Deal and the renovation wave, where the European Union promotes the renovation of buildings, helping people to cut their energy bills and energy use. This can be done by traditional means, for example, using thermal insulation or having heating and cooling equipment with high efficiencies. But in the latest revision of the Energy Performance of Building Directive in 2018, it became clear that there is a strong emphasis also on the potential of smart technologies. These smart technologies can improve both energy efficiency, but also bring additional benefits, most notably also improve the well-being of people. And so although those technologies are out there on the market, the current understanding is that the market uptake is not what it could potentially be, and there's a lot of benefits to reap. There are some bottlenecks why these smart technologies are currently not adopted in the way they could be, although being technically feasible and having a good cost payback. One of the bottlenecks is a lack of understanding of what the actual benefits are and a good way to communicate about those. And that's why the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive introduced this concept of a smart readiness indicator. This is to be a common framework to be used in the EU member states to rate smart readiness of buildings, to inform people, investors, owners, occupants, facility managers, and so on the value that the smart technologies in a building can have on various impact levels. This concept of the SRI has been introduced in the EPBD and has further been developed in close cooperation with various EU member states and relevant stakeholders in the building value chain. We've now reached the position that the development has of this first iteration has completed, and member states have the possibility to sign up to a voluntary test phase or immediately evolve to an implementation phase. And that's exactly what the support contract is also supporting. Voilà. So here you see an overview of this timeline. There was a first technical support study investigating the concept starting in 2017. In 2018, it was introduced in the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive as an optional common EU scheme. In the second technical support study, the methodology was further fine-tuned and various implementation scenarios were investigated. For your information, there was also a small scale voluntary test phase part of the second technical study, which led to the further iteration of some of the elements of the calculation methodology, and these were taken up in the delegated acts and the implementing acts defined by the end of 2020. So by now there is this definition of a common calculation methodology of the SRI in a legal act and an act defining the technical modalities for effective implementation in EU member states. And so working on top of those two legal acts, we are now in this phase of supporting testing and implementation in the EU. A reminder on how this is set up as a common EU instrument that is voluntary for member states. This means that member states can opt in to launch the SRI as an instrument in their local context or start to implement it. There are some elements of the SRI which might need further contextualization. For example, translating some of the elements such as weighting factors could be further adopted. There are service catalogs to be defined, etc. So at this very moment, we do need involvement of member states to be launching an official test phase. Private stakeholders, research organizations, etc., are also welcome to participate in discussing. They can start testing the SRI documentation and calculation sheets and every information that is available. But at this very moment, there is not a possibility to already do a formal SRI certification of a building, as there need to be some decisions taken by the member state supervising this process. With this, the background of the SRI concept was introduced. I now hand over the floor to Paul Waite to introduce us to the methodology of the SRI.
Thank you very much, Stijn, and good morning, everybody. I'll now give you a sort of quick resume of the building blocks of the SRI methodology. As stipulated in the PPD itself, there are three key functionalities for the Smart Readiness Indicator. They basically assess the buildings or the building units based on their capacity to satisfy these three key functionalities. The first one is the optimization of energy efficiency and overall in-use performance. The second one is the building's ability to adapt their operation to the needs of the occupant. And the third is its ability to adapt to signals from the grid, the energy flexibility side. Now, supporting this, you'll see this as I walk through this methodology, that there's a hierarchy of inputs that go through the SRI. And actually, each one of these, as you'll see, produces its own score, which then feeds up the hierarchy. Underneath the three key functionalities are 7 impact criteria, specific impact criteria. So feeding into the optimization of energy efficiency and overall in-use performance, there is energy efficiency, and there's maintenance and fault prediction, and they are both separate impact criteria. Then feeding into the ability to adapt operation to the needs of the occupant, there are 4 impact criteria, which are comfort, convenience, health, well-being, and accessibility, and information to occupants. And then lastly, the third impact criteria, or third key functionality, has a single impact criteria, which is essentially the same thing. It's energy flexibility and storage. Now, these are then determined or assessed across services that the building has. And the methodology for calculating the SRI is based on the assessment of these smart ready services that the building has or could use. And this is all listed in a service catalog. These services are grouped into 9 technical domains. They are heating, space cooling, domestic hot water, ventilation, lighting, dynamic building envelope, which is essentially like the ability to shade the building, electricity, electric vehicle charging, and monitoring and control. And this then leads you to underpinning this is a matrix where you see the services or the 9 technical domains down the left-hand side and impact criteria across the top. Now, the assessment process, which is conducted in any building, will look at the relationship for each of these 9 technical domains to these impact criteria. So for space heating, it will be assessed for its energy efficiency, for its maintenance and fault prediction, for its comfort, for its convenience, health, well-being, and accessibility, the information to occupants, and the energy of flexibility and storage. And each one of those impact criteria for that particular domain will be awarded a score, a percentage, where if you score 100%, it means you have maximum smart readiness functionality, and if you score 0%, it means you have no smart readiness functionality for that particular impact criterion and that particular domain. And so there is a potential for up to 57 distinct scores within this matrices. Now, each one of these scores can then be aggregated across the domains, the 9 technical domains, as is shown on the far right of this, this image here. So you can aggregate them for heating or for lighting or for electricity, for example. And the scores can also be aggregated and are aggregated for the impact criteria, the 7 impact criteria. So you'll have an overall score for energy efficiency, you'll have an overall score for comfort, and that will actually be aggregated across the 9 technical domains to give your overall impact criterion score. And then, of course, as we showed earlier, these impact criteria feed into the 3 key functionalities. So the score for optimization of energy efficiency and overall in-use performance will be aggregated from the overall score for energy efficiency and the overall score for maintenance and fault prediction to give a particular score for that key functionality. And then for the next one, it will be the overall scores of the 4 impact criteria that feed into the adapt operation to the needs of the occupant. And then lastly, there will be the energy flexibility and storage, which will be aggregated from that impact criteria beneath it. And this leads to an overall score for the whole building, which is aggregated from the 3 key impact scores. And again, if your building scores 100%, then you have maximum smart readiness functionality with today's levels of smartness, and 0% no smart readiness functionality, and any value in between is an intermediate value, of course. And this allows there to be then 7 classes, which are actually stipulated in the delegated act for the smart readiness indicator, of which the lowest class is less than 20% and the highest is more than 90%. So I hope that gives you a quick sort of overview, and I'll pass this over to my colleague on how to assess the SRI in practice.
Thank you, Paul. So now I'm going to present, to give some tips on how to assess the SRI in practice. So first, want to make clear, so as previously mentioned, the member states can adapt the methodology, but there are some aspects that must be covered by any SRI assessment. And these aspects are those listed in the legal act. So for instance, a score must be calculated for each of the 3 key functionalities, so energy efficiency and overall in-use performance, adaptation to the needs of the occupant, adaptations to signal from the grid. So this has to be part of any SRI assessment. Then the 7 impact criteria that have just been presented must be covered, as well as the 9 technical domains. Then some aspects can be adapted by member states. For instance, member states can define the SRI service catalog, which services should be assessed in each technical domain. So a generic service catalog is available in the common EU methodology, but member states can adapt it. And also, member states can adapt the corresponding weighting factors, meaning how each service should weight for each impact criterion. So here as well, we have set some default weighting factors, but member states can also have their say and change those weighting factors. And in addition, member states can also define additional information on inclusiveness, connectivity, interoperability, cybersecurity, data protection. So these aspects can be covered by in the SRI certificate if it is chosen by member states. Regarding the generic EU-level methodology, there are 2 main methods for assessing the smart readiness of a building. So there is method A, which is a simplified approach. It makes use of a simplified service catalog, which is well suited for simple buildings, for instance, existing residential buildings or small non-residential buildings. It is based on a checklist approach, and the assessment time is less than 1 hour in general. By contrast, method B is a detailed approach. It makes use of a full and detailed service catalog, which corresponds to complex buildings, for instance, new buildings and non-residential buildings in general. On-site inspection and walkthrough are needed, leading to an assessment time of up to 1 day, depending on the size and complexity of the building. And an expert needs to conduct the assessment with the assistance of the facility manager of the building. What is important is that the assessment process is the same for both methods. So as it has been presented, the 7 impact criteria, the 9 technical domains have to be assessed, and the difference between both methods lies in the service catalog, which is different, which means that the level of expertise required to conduct the assessment is different. Within a previous study, 31 buildings were assessed with both the simplified method A and the more detailed method B, and it was concluded that the results for both methods were generally well aligned, and here on this graph you can see, well, some differences, but no major ones. A customized method is also possible, as already indicated. And in this case, the applicable services are chosen one by one in the existing service catalog, and additional services can be defined within each technical domain. So we want to repeat here that the choice between using a regular method for A or B or a customized method depends on country specificities, and it is upon the decision of the member state undertaking the SRI test or implementation phase. So the national or regional, in certain cases, authorities are the ones who decide about which method should be used and which service catalog should be used. One word regarding energy performance certificate, since there is a link, of course, between the SRI and EPCs. So on one hand, the SRI assesses the smart readiness of buildings with a strong focus on energy aspects. And on the other hand, EPCs assess the energy performance of a building in general. And both schemes should help enhance energy performance of buildings. What is important is that experts in charge of issuing EPC should also be competent for issuing SRI certificates. And this is why member states may couple the issuing of the SRI certificate with their EPC scheme. There is an SRI assessment package that is available upon request. So it consists of a calculation sheet and a practical guide. It is based on the generic SRI methodology and service catalog developed at the EU level and can be adapted to specific contexts. And we are going to organize some detailed webinar early next year to explain how the calculation sheet works. Thank you. Now I'm giving the floor to Régis.
Thank you very much, Sophie. I take the opportunity to remind that you can ask questions using the chat of this WebEx, so feel free, and thank you for those who already put some comments and questions, and again, we will address all of them at the end of this training. So indeed, now a short overview of the SRI public resources which we have available for you. The first thing is, so we have a dedicated SRI webpage that's directly on the European Commission website, and that's the link that you see at the top of this slide. So there is already quite some content, and incrementally we are going to upload some additional resources. And so typically some of you already asked if the slides of this training are going to be available, and the response is yes. And you will find them indeed on this SRI website. So typically, indeed, this training package is already available online. And actually, the version that you will find online of these slides, it's a longer version with additional examples to those already presented by Sophie. So it's a more detailed version if you want to go a bit more in depth with tips and tricks about the implementation of the Smart Readiness Indicator. Apart from this, we have a newsletter. If you can go to the next slide, Sophie. Yeah, perfect. No, just the previous one. We had indeed the SRI Explain page. So that's one of the sections that you will find also on the website. So it's kind of FAQ in which you will find the most frequent questions we are asked. So we have also an email where you can contact us, which is support@smartreadinessindicator.eu. I will put them on the chat later on. And so on a regular basis, we put your questions and our answers, obviously, in this SRI Explain page of the website. On the next slide, again, so we have a dedicated SRI newsletter. So we warmly invite you all to register to this newsletter. We send that every 3 or 4 months. And again, in these slides, you've got the link to register, and I will put it just after in the chat as well. And here, finally, so we give a few key links to, in particular, the directives. So first, the EPBD directive, the original version, and then the amended version of 2018. There is also the link if you want to look further at the implementing regulation of the SRI and also at the delegated regulation of the SRI. So these are very useful if you want to learn more. And finally, there is also, this is also material you will find on the website. So it's the material which was delivered from the study carried out in 2019-2020 to support the development of the SRI. So there is in particular the final report, which includes a bit of history on the development of the Smart Readiness Indicator, and also many different examples, practical examples, and also an executive summary of these final reports. So again, these are all the public resources that we have for you at the moment. I will put all the link right now in the chat, and also this contact email where you can contact us, the SRI support team. And now we'll give back the floor to Stein, who is going to introduce the next steps.
Thank you, Regis. Indeed, summary of the next step are the 2 important upcoming things, because of course there's still a long trajectory to go and many actions ongoing at member state level. But the 2 elements we especially want to pay attention to is, first of all, the launch of the SRI platform. The SRI platform is to be a forum where various stakeholders interested in the SRI can come together, interact, and discuss. We aim to have both member states representative and people working really on local implementation, as well as businesses, manufacturers of smart technologies, assessors, etc., to convene, discuss best practices, discuss methodological issues, etc., etc. We will kick off this SRI platform on the 16th December this year. It will be an online event, and you still have the opportunity to register and join us at that event. The agenda for this kickoff meeting is a summary of previous SRI development work. Then we go in somewhat more detail than we did today on checking what's in the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive and in the SRI Acts. We will provide you with an overview of tasks and planning of upcoming activities in the SRI support contract and how that relates to the platform meetings. And more specifically, new elements brought to the table at the SRI platform will be especially also the testing programs, so a summary of the current status in the various EU member states, and a discussion on the SRI platform and how it will operate. I can already give some insights in the fact that there will be some plenary meetings like we have at the kickoff. But in parallel to that, we'll also be launching various working groups on the SRI, which can convene at a higher frequency, and then report back at the plenary meetings of the SRI platform. And the process on how we'll be setting up these working groups and who can attend will be further elaborated at this event on the 16th of December, the launch of the SRI platform. And we'll end, as we do today, with an open discussion and a Q&A where you can have your questions being answered. So thanks again. Thanks also to my colleague presenters, and I hope all of you have a nice day. Goodbye.